You got some big-name retailers, Walmart, Best Buy. You've also got companies that make everything from the shampoo brands that Americans use on their hair down to the shoe brands. Little by little, the costs of President Donald Trump's tariffs are starting to show here in the U.S. When President Donald Trump decided to expand the tariff list to more than 70 countries on August 1st, the message from Washington was crystal clear. He wanted to bring jobs back to the United States, increase the pressure, and force partners to sign trade agreements favorable to America. But within just a few days, the first impacts did not appear in Beijing or Ottawa, but at home, from Detroit to Dallas, and everyday meals and household spending of American families. One Detroit auto supplier says he's going to have to lay off employees and close a warehouse because of the president's tariffs. Went to India to procure products from there, trying to save our consumers money, and now India's hit with tariffs, so everywhere we turn, we're starting to see more and more roadblocks, so it's been quite discouraging. America's leading corporations are simultaneously sounding the alarm in the second quarter. General Motors reported tariff-related losses, amounting to $1.1 billion. Ford has not escaped the spiral either, with losses of around $800 million. Stanley Black & Decker, a household name in manufacturing projects that for the full year it will shoulder a similar $800 million hit, anticipating this trajectory. Apple proactively recorded an additional $1.1 billion in tariff-related expenses in the current quarter. These are not isolated figures. They reflect a broader wave of damage rippling across multiple sectors of the American economy. Consumers are also beginning to feel the impact in tangible ways. Retail chains like Walmart and Best Buy have quietly shifted the burden onto customers. Even basic items such as shampoo and footwear now carry hidden surcharges, and this is no longer speculation. Reuters journalists have tracked price increases directly tied to tariff pressures. Even a morning cup of coffee in the United States is not spared, since nearly 1/3 of their imported coffee comes from Brazil, which has just been caught in the crosshairs of the new duties. Experts warn that this may be the stage when ordinary Americans truly start to feel the economic blow weighing down on daily life.
We're seeing kind of these sectoral hits and the impacts of tariffs really showing up in places like cars, vehicle parts, and energy. But energy dropped almost 20% in Q2, obviously. That's going to be a hard hit in Alberta as well as the rest of the country.
Just north of the border, Canada officially came under a 35% tariff as of August 1st. Products falling outside the protection of the USMCA, in such as steel, aluminum, softwood lumber, and a wide range of auto parts, were immediately targeted. The blow has had a severe impact, according to Statistics Canada. In the second quarter of 2025, the country's total exports fell by 13%, with the energy sector alone plunging nearly 20%. Alberta has been the hardest hit province, while the auto parts industry and consumer goods have also recorded troubling declines. Yet instead of responding with anger or retaliatory measures, Prime Minister Mark Carney is pursuing a different path, redefining Canada's position. This approach demonstrates that Canada is not merely bracing against the storm, but is gradually adapting, turning challenge into opportunity. Now Canada is looking to boost trade with its other North American trading partner, Mexico, as both countries try to work out a trade agreement with a volatile United States under President Donald Trump this week. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand were in Mexico City for a series of high-level meetings. The focus of the trip was to strengthen trade ties and relaunch diplomatic cooperation with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. It was a carefully calculated move earlier this year when some politicians in Ottawa floated the idea of excluding Mexico from the USMCA. Tensions flared. Now the goal has shifted to restore balance with the 2026 USMCA review approaching. Both Ottawa and Mexico understand the value of leaning on one another, especially as Donald Trump pushes for bilateral deals. One notable detail is that Trump granted Mexico an additional 90 days before imposing new tariffs, while Canada received no such grace period. This discrepancy spurred Ottawa to act quickly to reinforce its partnership with Mexico. At present, Mexico accounts for only about 1% of Canada's total exports in 2024. But officials see ample room for growth, in contrast to Trump's approach of ramping up pressure through tariffs and betting on the American economy's resilience. Ottawa is taking a different path rather than chasing short-term gains. Prime Minister Mark Carney is focused on a long-term strategy, diversifying markets, shielding vulnerable sectors, and building a solid foundation for trade. The results are already visible within just 4 months, according to U.S. labor data. American manufacturing has lost between 30,000 and 40,000 jobs. Meanwhile, Canada is working to consolidate stability. One side is fueling disruption to force concessions. The other is building endurance to weather volatility, and from morning coffee to auto parts. Americans are beginning to feel the real cost of tariff policy. What was once seen merely as a diplomatic tool is now directly impacting corporate profits, household budgets, and even jobs. Trump's tariff war may be aimed at external rivals, but its consequences are bouncing back home. Canada, instead of waiting for Washington to change course, is proactively expanding ties and building new bridges that may well be the strongest response of all. Even if it is not loud on August 1st, Trump carried out his warning. Ottawa now faces a 35% tariff on products deemed outside the scope of CUSA, from steel and aluminum to auto parts and copper tubing. It was clearly a pressure tactic to force Canada into signing a new deal more quickly, yet once the policy was implemented, something unusual became clear. The oil industry, Canada's strategic backbone, remained untouched while a host of industrial goods were targeted. Canadian crude oil, which makes up 50 to 70% of U.S. imports, was exempt. This was no accident. Canada exports more than 4 million barrels of crude oil to the United States every day, much of it heavy oil refined in Midwestern facilities. If Trump truly wanted to strike at Canada's weak spot, he left the sharpest point aside. This was not coincidence. It was the result of Canada quietly reshaping its trade profile. According to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, more than 80% of Canada's exports to the United States still fall within CUSMA's safe zone, not only crude oil, but also natural gas. Essential food products and many auto parts tied to integrated supply chains remain protected even with copper, the commodity Trump has targeted most aggressively. The impact is limited. The 50% duty applies only to processed products such as pipes and wiring, while Canada mainly sells cathodes, anodes, and concentrates, which lie outside the tariff's reach for that reason. Trump's tough-sounding rhetoric on copper may carry political weight, but the actual effect is modest. By adjusting trade flows to focus on goods still protected under CUSMA, Canada is not only withstanding the latest wave of tariffs, but in some respects pulling ahead.
Does Canada have any leverage in these trade negotiations? Not much. And you've seen that even though we have probably the most ideal prime minister to be negotiating the problem, is that Canada doesn't have a lot of leverage here, in part because you're dealing with a crazy person and it's really hard to negotiate crazy.
Yet a new obstacle has emerged, this time carrying more political weight than economic. Just hours before the deadline, Donald Trump unexpectedly posted on Truth Social, linking the trade negotiation process to Canada's recognition of the state of Palestine. Instantly, the focus shifted away from tariffs and squarely onto geopolitics. Trump used Ottawa's position as a pretext to reject the agreement. For outside observers, it felt as though the rules of the game were being rewritten in the middle of play today. The justification might be trade balances tomorrow. It could be foreign policy. The message to Canada was clear. Even if Ottawa is ready to sign, the road to consensus will hardly be straightforward. For that reason, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government has chosen not to rush. In his statement on August 1st, Carney stressed that dialogue could very well continue beyond the deadline imposed by Trump. Unlike many other countries, Canada is not chasing a document for display. What Ottawa seeks is leverage, an advantage that can shift the balance in the long run.
Canada right now, due to its CUSMA deal, kind of has a better deal than that already. And so if Canada were to face that 15% tariff across the board, well, that would not be a good deal at all for Canada. And so they're better to take their time and continue to try and effort a deal that will be better for our country.
The White House may have braced itself for panic, but in reality, it was met with careful calculations. Analysts from the Bank of Canada and CTV's Ottawa Bureau pointed out that compared with the trade deals the United States has signed with South Korea, or the EU, both sides are currently subject to a common tariff rate of 15% in practice. Canada still retains an advantage thanks to the provisions already in place under CUSMA. If Ottawa were to hastily accept a deal similar to South Korea's, the risk of long-term losses would be very real. That is why Prime Minister Mark Carney has chosen to put his trust in time. In this case, creates more options. It allows for the possibility of securing better terms while safeguarding critical sectors such as energy and defense. Donald Trump wants to project toughness. The figure of 35% sounds dramatic and grabs headlines, but when one looks deeper into the structure of North American trade, it is clear that nothing can change overnight. Canada's core exports are still crossing the border, the oil pipelines remain in operation, uranium supplies remain untouched. The cross-border power grid has not been disrupted. Canada still holds many cards. The real question is not whether Ottawa can endure, but whether Trump has played his hand too soon.
Certainly sounds like Canada-US trade talks are in a holding pattern that is after President Donald Trump raised tariffs on certain Canadian goods.
Some of the country's premiers are calling for retaliation, taking the American alcohol off the shelves. Looking at the procurement process, we have to, push back for sure.
At the stroke of midnight on August 1st, President Donald Trump officially raised tariffs on Canadian goods outside the protection of the USMCA from 25% to 35%. The decision was seen as a direct strike meant to punish Ottawa for refusing to sign the trade deal Washington had tabled at the last minute, unlike South Korea or the European Union partners who accepted U.S. terms in exchange for stability. Canada chose to stand firm, demanding a deal considered fair and sustainable, rather than conceding to short-term pressure. Numerically, the tariff applies directly to only a small portion of Canada's total exports, but its message carries enormous symbolic weight. It signals that even a close neighbor, a long-standing NATO ally and America's top trading partner, can become a target of punitive measures. Behind the 35% figure lies not only economic impact, but also a stark sign that a relationship once considered resilient, built on decades of mutual trust, is now entering turbulent waters. This move has triggered a sharp shift from strategic cooperation to direct confrontation. It has left Canadian businesses and provinces deeply concerned, as the long-standing stability of bilateral trade, once seen as one of the world's most reliable pillars, is now facing serious questions for many. This is not merely about tariffs, but a reminder that geopolitics can rewrite the rules of the game overnight.
Canada is strong. We can give ourselves far more than anyone can take away. Building sustainably, building together, building positively, and that's what we're gonna do. And yes, we'll come to something with the Americans.
In the face of Washington's fiery response, Ottawa chose an entirely different path. There were no blistering attacks at the podium, nor was any retaliatory tariff package rolled out on the spot. What Canada displayed was calm restraint and determination. Ordinary citizens may have expressed disappointment, but fear was entirely absent. This was not the first time Canada had faced such a situation during Donald Trump's first term. Ottawa had introduced countermeasures, including pulling American whiskey off store shelves. Moves that seemed small at the time created significant political ripples south of the border. That memory still lingers in the minds of people in both countries, serving as a reminder that hasty reactions do not always deliver the desired outcome. Today, the public mood in Canada has shifted after years of being caught in cycles of trade tension. Canadians appear to value stability and long-term resilience over short-lived confrontations. People are weary of the endless turbulence where a single political decision can upend markets overnight. Against this backdrop, Trump's approach is no longer seen as substantive diplomacy, but more as political theater. And this time, Canada has decided not to take part in the play. Prime Minister Mark Carney has not rushed to sign a half-hearted deal like South Korea or the European Union. He has made it clear that Canada will not accept any template agreement if it does not reflect the country's core interests. In his public remarks, Carney speaks often of Canada's endurance and self-confidence. He acknowledges the complexity of the negotiations, but shows no sign of wavering. His strategy is patience to avoid falling into the trap of a bad deal, to let the noise pass and to preserve Canada's long-term leverage. Trump may expect concessions, but what he has met with instead is a quiet challenge, unspoken yet unmistakably clear. Economists were quick to highlight an important fact. The vast majority of Canadian exports to the U.S. market, about 95%, remain protected under the provisions of the USMCA. This means that only a very small share is directly affected by the new tariff hike. Yet that small portion carries heavy symbolic weight, particularly in politically sensitive regions such as Ontario, where steel and auto manufacturing serve as pillars of both the economy and social life. Former U.S. Ambassador to Canada David Cohen even issued a public warning that such moves are steadily eroding the trust that has been built over decades. For years, the relationship between the two neighbors has been viewed globally as a model of stability. It extends beyond trade to defense, intelligence sharing, and cultural cooperation. That trust, rebuilt and reinforced during the Biden administration, now faces the risk of fracturing. Once again, behind the scenes, Ottawa and Mexico City are accelerating efforts to advance the Northern Corridor, a massive $120 billion trade route designed to bypass the United States entirely. it is a quiet reminder that some close allies have begun preparing for a scenario where America is no longer the reliable partner it once was. Meanwhile, Trump's team continues to showcase strength. They cite second-quarter GDP growth of 3%, as proof that the U.S. economy remains solid, but economists, including those quoted in official Commerce Department briefings, explain that the figure is largely the result of a technical rebound. The main driver was a sharp drop in imports following a wave of stockpiling by U.S. businesses ahead of the new tariffs taking effect. That hoarding created the appearance of temporary growth, but it does not reflect the true health of the economy. In reality, the hundreds of trade deals Trump promised back in April have quickly faded by August 1st. The actual number signed was fewer than 10, and notably Canada was not on the list rather than expanding relationships. Trump's hardline approach is isolating the United States, with each new tariff inflicting fresh damage on a key ally within this picture. Canada is not only showing resolve but is also quietly carving out ways to escape pressure, preserving its options and creating strategic space to shift the balance when needed. Ottawa does not need to be loud. Its resilience and subtle diplomacy may in fact be its greatest advantage in the long game. Canada's resilience and subtle diplomacy may in fact be its greatest advantage in the long game. Trump's tariff strategy against Canada has triggered massive consequences for American industries and jobs, while Carney's bold response protects Canada and turns the tables on U.S. trade policy. With Canada fighting back, Trump faces growing pressure as his tariff plan unravels. Carney Canada and global trade are reshaping the balance of power, leaving Trump struggling to explain the fallout from his failed tariff gamble. Leave your thoughts in the comments about tariffs and trade, and watch another video on related economic topics to stay informed about these developing trade dynamics.